In 1903, a doctor in rural Virginia made a house call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He found 4 children's graves in the backyard, fresh graves, all from the same family, all dead before age 10. When he asked the mother what killed them, she whispered 7 words that made his blood run cold. The same thing that's killing this one. In her arms, she held a 5th child, a little girl barely breathing, her bones so fragile they were breaking under her own weight. The doctor searched for a disease, a poison, an explanation. He found none. What he didn't know, what the mother didn't know, was that the answer was hidden in a wedding photograph from 16 years earlier. A photograph of her and her husband on their wedding day, smiling, in love, and related by blood. This isn't a ghost story. This is something worse. This is a story about what happens when love becomes a genetic time bomb. And what you're about to hear didn't just destroy one family. It's still destroying families today. Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Her name was Ada Whitmore, and in 1886, she was considered one of the most eligible young women in Rappahannock County, Virginia. She could read Latin. She played piano. She came from old money, the kind that survived the Civil War by hiding gold in the walls. But Ada didn't want any of the suitors her father brought to the parlor. She wanted Thomas Whitmore, her first cousin. They'd grown up together, running through the same tobacco fields, reading under the same oak trees, attending the same family reunions where everyone knew everyone because everyone was everyone. In that world, in that time, marrying your cousin wasn't just accepted. It was often preferred. It kept the land in the family. It kept the bloodline pure. It kept secrets from spreading to outsiders. And so in May of 1887, Ada and Thomas were married in a small Baptist church with their entire family in attendance, both sides of the family, which of course was the same family. Nobody thought it was strange, nobody objected. In fact, Ada's mother had married her own second cousin 30 years earlier. This wasn't a scandal, this was tradition. But what Ada and Thomas didn't know, what nobody knew in 1887, was that they were both carriers of the same genetic mutation, a recessive gene that had been quietly traveling through the Whitmore bloodline for generations, waiting for 2 carriers to meet, to fall in love, to have children. And when they did, that gene would finally wake up. Their first child was born in 1888, a daughter. They named her Clara. She seemed healthy at first, pink-cheeked, strong lungs, nursing well. But by her second birthday, something was wrong. Clara couldn't walk like other children her age. Her legs would buckle beneath her. She would cry out in pain when anyone touched her arms. The local doctor examined her and found nothing. He told Ada it was probably just slow development. Give it time, but time didn't help. By age 4, Clara had stopped growing. Her spine began to curve, her fingers twisted inward. She would live to be 11 years old, bedridden for most of it, before dying of what the death certificate vaguely called failure to thrive. Ada was heartbroken, but she was also young, and in that era, child mortality was common. Diseases swept through towns without warning. Children died from fevers, from infections, from accidents on the farm. So when Ada became pregnant again in 1890, the family celebrated. They told her Clara's death was God's will, that the next child would be healthy, strong, a boy perhaps, someone to carry on the Whitmore name. But the next child, a son they named James, was born with the same symptoms: weak bones, slow growth, deformities that worsened as he aged. He died at 9, then came Margaret in 1893, dead at 7, then William in 1895, dead at 6. 4 children, 4 graves, all with the same mysterious, agonizing condition. And Ada, devastated, guilt-ridden, hollowed out by grief, began to believe she was cursed. The townspeople whispered. Some said the Whitmore land was poisoned. Others said it was divine punishment for pride. A few of the older women, the ones who remembered things, quietly suggested that maybe marrying Thomas had been a mistake. But nobody said it out loud, not where Ada could hear. By 1898, Ada had stopped attending church. She rarely left the house. Thomas, once vibrant and ambitious, had become a ghost in his own home, spending long hours in the fields, avoiding the nursery, avoiding the tiny coffins that kept appearing in the family plot behind the house. But here's where the story takes a turn that makes it almost unbearable. Ada had a sister, younger by 3 years. Her name was Eleanor, and Eleanor had married a man from outside the county, a merchant from Richmond named Charles Dawson. They had 5 children, all healthy, all thriving. Eleanor would visit Ada sometimes, bringing her children along, and Ada would watch them run and play and grow, and something inside her would crack a little more each time. She began to wonder, was it her? Was there something wrong with her body specifically, or was it Thomas? She had no way of knowing. This was decades before genetic science, decades before anyone understood dominant and recessive traits, before Mendel's pea-plant experiments became common knowledge in schools. All Ada knew was that her children died and her sister's children lived. And the difference, the only real difference she could see, was that Elena had married outside the family. But even then, even with that thought forming in her mind, Ada couldn't quite grasp the full picture. Because Elena's husband Charles, he wasn't a Whitmore, but his mother had been. Charles Dawson was also Ada's cousin, second cousin, true farther removed than Thomas, but still carrying that same bloodline, still carrying that same hidden silent mutation. And in 1901, one of Elena's children, a daughter named Rose, began showing symptoms. The same symptoms: weak bones, curved spine, stunted growth. Rose would die at age 10, and that's when the family finally started to realize that this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a curse. This was something in the blood. By 1910, the Whitmore family tree had become a medical horror show. Ada and Thomas had tried one more time. A 5th child born in 1899, who lived to age 14, before succumbing to the same deterioration that had claimed his siblings. Elena lost 2 more children to the condition, and then the next generation began to marry. This is where it spirals into something almost incomprehensible. Because in tight, knit rural communities, especially among wealthy families trying to preserve their estates, the marriage pool was small. Ada's surviving nieces and nephews, Elena's healthy children, grew up and married within the same social circle, which meant they married other cousins, other widows, other carriers, and the genetic lottery they were playing completely unaware had devastating odds. One of Elena's sons, Richard, married a girl from a neighboring farm. Her maiden name was Whitmore, different branch of the family tree, but the same root. They had 6 children between 1912 and 1922. 4 of them inherited the condition, 2 survived to adulthood, but neither could walk without assistance. Neither could work, neither would have children of their own. Another niece, Catherine, married a man whose grandmother had been a Whitmore. 3 children, all 3 affected, all 3 dead before age 20. By the 1920s, the family's reputation had shifted. They were no longer seen as old money aristocracy. They were seen as cursed, tragic, possibly inbred, though that word was only whispered, never spoken directly. Young Whitmore started leaving the county, moving to cities, changing their names, cutting ties, but some stayed, and some still didn't understand. In 1925, a Whitmore granddaughter named Evelyn, Ada's granddaughter, though Ada had died in 1991, never knowing the full scope of what she'd set in motion, married her third cousin, a man she'd known since childhood, Bard, a man who seemed healthy, whose parents seemed healthy. Surely, they thought, we're far enough removed. Surely the blood is diluted by now. They had 3 children. 2 were affected. It wasn't until 1932 that a doctor finally gave it a name. A young physician from Johns Hopkins doing research on hereditary diseases in rural Virginia came across the Whitmore family records. He traced birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses. He drew out the family tree on a massive sheet of paper, and what he saw made him go cold. It was a textbook case of autosomal recessive inheritance, a genetic pattern where both parents must carry the mutation for a child to be affected. The doctor's report, published in an obscure medical journal in 1934, didn't use the family's real name. He called them Family W, but anyone from Rappahannock County who read it would have known exactly who he was talking about. The condition itself, it was a rare connective tissue disorder, something that affected collagen production and bone development. In the general population, carriers were incredibly rare, perhaps 1 in 10, 0, 0. But in the Whitmore family, through generations of cousin marriages, the carrier rate had climbed to nearly 1 in 3. The odds of 2 carriers marrying each other in the outside world were astronomically low, but within the Whitmore family, it was practically inevitable. The doctor's report included a recommendation: genetic counseling. He suggested that all remaining Whitters be tested, that they be advised against marrying within the family, that they understand the risks. But genetic counseling in 1934, rural Virginia, it might as well have been science fiction. Most of the family never even saw the report. And even if they had, the stigma, the shame of admitting their bloodline was tainted, it was too much. So they did what families like theirs had always done. They stayed quiet, they buried their dead, they whispered prayers, and some of them kept marrying each other. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the 1950s, the Whitmore family had scattered across 3 states, but the damage was already generational. There were descendants who'd never met each other, who had no idea they shared the same corrupted genetic legacy, who would go on to marry and have children and watch, confused and terrified as history repeated itself in ways they couldn't explain. In 1956, a woman named Dorothy Mitchell brought her 6-year-old daughter to a hospital in Richmond. The child couldn't straighten her arms. Her bones were fragile as glass. Dorothy had no idea why. The doctors ran tests, took family histories, and eventually one of them asked the question, "Ma'am, what was your maiden name?" Dorothy hesitated, then quietly said, "Whitmore." The doctor nodded slowly. He'd heard of them. Dorothy's grandmother had been Ada's niece. Dorothy herself had married a man from Kentucky, a man she thought had no connection to her family. But his mother, it turned out, had been born in Virginia. Maiden name Whitmore, different branch, different county, but the same blood. Their daughter would live to 31, wheelchair-bound, before dying of complications from her condition. Dorothy would never forgive herself, even though she'd had no way of knowing, even though nobody had ever told her. By the 1970s, Genetic testing had become more available. Some Whitmore descendants got tested. Some discovered they were carriers and chose not to have children. Others got tested and found out they'd already passed it on, that their children, healthy for now, carried the mutation and might one day face the same choice. A few refused to get tested at all. They said it was better not to know that God would decide that blood was blood, and you couldn't outrun your own family. But the cruelest part, the mutation didn't just affect the Whitters. Over the decades, as carriers married into other families, family buzz, Eliz with no idea what they were inheriting, the gene quietly spread. A Whitmore daughter married a Thompson. A Whitmore son married a Hayes. And suddenly, the Thompsons and the Hayes were carriers too. The contamination, slow and silent, crept outward like roots from a poison tree. Today, in 2025, there are still Whitmore descendants living in Virginia, in Kentucky, and North Carolina. Most of them have no idea about Ada and Thomas. They don't know about the children buried in that family plot, about the doctor's report from 1934, about the generations of compounding tragedy. Family Bible that might have held the answers was lost in a house fire in 1968. The graves are overgrown. The church where Ada and Thomas were married was torn down in 1987, but the gene is still out there, still waiting. Modern genetic testing can identify carriers, can tell you the odds, can give you choices that Ada never had. But it requires knowing to look. It requires someone in your family saying the quiet part out loud that maybe, just maybe, there's something in the bloodline that needs to be examined. And most families don't want to say that. Most families would rather let the past stay buried. Here's what haunts me about this story. Ada loved Thomas. Genuinely, deeply loved him. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She wasn't being reckless or ignorant by the standards of her time. She made a choice that thousands of other people in her era made, a choice that was socially acceptable, even encouraged, and it destroyed her life. It destroyed her children. It sent ripples of suffering forward through time that are still being felt today, more than a century later, by people who will never even know her name. There's no villain in this story, no monster, just two people who loved each other, a society that saw nothing wrong with their union, and a genetic mutation that had been hiding in their family for generations, waiting for exactly this moment to reveal itself. The Whitmore family paid the price for something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't stop. And the truly terrifying part? They're not the only ones. There are families all across America, all across the world, carrying hidden genetic time bombs passed down through generations of intermarriage. Some know, most don't. And every day, someone somewhere is making the same choice Ada made. Marrying someone they love, someone they grew up with, someone who just happens to share a little too much of their blood. And somewhere in the future, their great-great-grandchildren might be living with the consequences, wondering why their family tree seems to be rotting from the inside. This is the kind of history that never makes it into textbooks, the kind of story that gets erased, rewritten, or simply forgotten because it's too uncomfortable, too intimate, too close to home. But it happened, it's still happening. And unless we're willing to look at these buried truths, to speak them out loud, to learn from the mistakes written in our own blood, history will just keep repeating itself, one cousin marriage at a time, one hidden gene at a time, one family at a time. If this story disturbed you, good, it should. And if it made you think twice about your own family tree, about the things nobody talks about at reunions, about the secrets that get buried with the people who knew them, then maybe, just maybe, Ada's suffering wasn't completely in vain. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think. Tell us where you're from. And if you know a story like this, if your family has its own buried secrets, its own genetic ghosts, you're not alone. Thank you for watching, and remember, the past isn't dead. It's not even past.